We're not talking about the best of them. We're just talking about the rest of them.
Not the worst parts, but the best parts. And the best parts we have. The best of the rest.
Hello, and you ooze, you lose. Welcome to Best of the Rest, the show where we take a second look at movies that were poorly received upon release and challenge ourselves to only talk about the things we like and what the movie does well. It's TV show movie month, and this week we are talking the 1995 film Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, the movie. My name is Chris Logan, and I am joined, as always, by my adult co-host that totally passes for a high schooler, Andrew Williams. All right, you ready for this one, Andrew?
No, I don't.
People can't see you, Andrew. I'm trying to...
I have a beard. No.
I would argue that a few cast members throughout the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers franchise, also don't pass for high schoolers, despite what they tell us.
You're not incorrect. Yes, but no, I am excited to talk about this movie. This is a movie that I have seen a great many times, and I'm excited to talk about it.
If we had like video game style stats on our life where you could like see accurate counts of how many times you've seen a movie, to this day, this movie probably ranks pretty high up, maybe top 20, maybe top 10 of movies I've seen the most. I watched it practically on loop as a child, along with the Turtles movies and a few other classics. But this one, I wore that VHS out for sure.
Absolutely. I definitely saw this in theaters, no question. I would have been there opening weekend with my dad. This was 95. I was just about to turn 8. So I was still very much the demographic for this show. And I know I was there opening weekend. Power Rangers was like, that was the thing. Like I hit the tail end of Ghostbusters and Ninja Turtles. I caught Turtles pretty full on when I was there, but I was there for all of Power Rangers. And this was a huge deal. You're like, oh man, a Power Rangers movie. This is nuts. This is awesome. So, yeah, I'm excited.
Yeah, I remember going to Discovery Zone, RAP Discovery Zone, and getting a White Ranger like trading card they had like as a tie-in. That's a prized possession of mine. I also remember getting his Zord, but the McDonald's Happy Meal version. Like, we didn't have like the actual like big one from the store, but that one was good enough for me. The missiles and the wings did not shoot out. That was the big difference. It was all like one.
They didn't shoot out on the toy either.
Oh, really? I wasn't missing out. It was just a little bit smaller.
You were not.
Otherwise, all good.
Yep, same thing. Because I between me and my brother had all those Power Rangers or all those Zords and everything. There's I probably mentioned it on our last episode, but there's a picture from one Christmas where it's just us, those classic green Power Ranger boxes. They were always green. And it's just us with this giant wall of Power Ranger stuff. And that continued for many years. And this movie was a big deal when it came out. I was amped.
I was definitely the White Ranger for Halloween that year with the ninja suit. That was a big deal. I think I told this story in the podcast once, but I remember like it took us a while to find it, like sold out everywhere looking for it. And I was like, well, Mom, if we can't find it, we could probably like make it out of toilet paper, like just wrap, because in my mind, like that would totally look like their suit. But
looks exactly the same.
Thankfully she did not listen to my idea, and we found a White Ranger suit.
Yeah, I was a Green Ranger kid. I was Green Ranger for a great many years. I did not actually find that picture of me in that suit. I'll see if I can message my mom and see if she can find one. But I didn't get the suit. I definitely remember having the White Ranger gloves from this movie that made the whooshing sounds. Like if you made a fist or like the right motions, they would literally be like, and I was like, this
awesome.
is great. This is awesome. Why? This is the greatest product ever created. But yeah, I remember my Green Ranger suit was better than my mom made it. She like got I don't remember what the brand was, but she like went to the fabric store, bought a pattern. Back when you buy patterns for things, and like you literally like it would have everything. You cut out all the pieces, how to sew it all together. My mom can make anything. If you ask her pretty much for any piece of clothing, she can figure out a way to do it.
Oh, I will. I plan on asking her for an adult-sized White Ranger suit now.
Absolutely. But and I remember the Green Ranger shield. She like made sure that it had all the lines and designs. And she made sure I knew how much of a pain that was to do. Because it was this gold reflective fabric. And she was like, and if you shine a light on it, you can't see. And if you take the light away, you can't see. I couldn't win, Andrew. So she like almost did it blind, and it looked amazing. I loved that costume. But yeah, man. Clearly a lot of love for that franchise as a child.
You have to find that picture. That sounds incredible.
I will see what I got.
Yeah, definitely love Power Rangers. I'm sure we've got plenty more stories we'll share throughout this episode, but let's go ahead and jump into it. Set the stage a little bit for this movie we're talking about today. Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, the movie, released June 30th of 1995, made on a budget of $15 million. At the box office, it brings in $66 million. Not the biggest blockbuster ever, but when you look at that budget, that is a pretty dang good return on their investment. Critically, it's not well received. It holds just a 32% on Rotten Tomatoes. I bet no one was surprised. I'm not surprised to see that number. I mean, it's a TV show ostensibly for children, just translated to film. They're not exactly trying to please critics. I'm a little more surprised by the audience score on Rotten Tomatoes, which is 56%. Who's going out of their way to log in Rotten Tomatoes to leave a negative review for the Power Rangers movie?
That's wild. I actually didn't realize that audience score was so low, because I feel like almost all Power Rangers fans have at least some love for this movie. It's a little weird to see it so middling, but who knows? Fix it, people. We have a power.
I will say, like, I still have an appreciation for the Power Rangers. I don't keep up with it. I don't watch the current seasons. I don't even go back and watch the old ones, to be honest with you. It's an interesting contrast to the Turtles franchise, because Ninja Turtles I have kept up with. I've still read comics or watch the current show, and something about that franchise just, this is going to sound very backhanded to the Power Rangers, but Turtles is like, it's a good story that it's just appropriate for all ages and not necessarily only geared towards kids. It doesn't feel alienating to go back and watch Turtles shows, even though it is, made with kids in mind. Whereas like Power Rangers is like, it's just unabashedly for kids. It's like, it's aimed right to that like 4 to 10 years old. And I don't know, it is a little alienating to parents, I guess. Like when you were a kid watching Power Rangers, your parents probably rolled their eyes if it was on. They didn't necessarily enjoy sitting there and watching it with you. Not that they probably didn't enjoy Turtles either, but I don't know what it is about those two, but I always have those franchises linked in my mind because they're, came into prominence at the exact same time in my life. But one, I've kind of stuck with and watched evolve, and Power Rangers I kind of just look back on fondly,
Yeah, no, I completely get it, because I'm kind of the same way. I kept up with Power Rangers a lot longer than any of my peers, to the point where like I didn't actively tell people I was still keeping up with it in order to not be made fun of. But there's this. I don't know if there's a nice way to say it, but Power Rangers, it's
kind of dumb. Is that?
I was trying to nicely say Power Rangers was not made with quality in mind. I say that as nicely as I can. It was made as cheap as possible, which led to cast departures. It often led to relatively unknown casts that would rarely go on to additional work because of the fact that they were kind of not great. There is a lot of love I have for that show, but it also, like, I go back and rewatch those original episodes, which I do occasionally, and man, it's sometimes a bit of a chore. Green with Evil is still dope as heck, but like Turtles was always more interesting because animation, first off, is a completely different beast. Like the making an animated show, like the one Turtle show that I would argue was made without quality in mind is the one everybody hates and nobody talks about. Next Mutation. Like nobody talks about Ninja Turtles: The Next Mutation because nobody enjoyed it. Because it was made as like a Power Rangers type attempt at the Ninja Turtles, and it showed. But the animated shows where there's thought and care, not that there's not thought and care put in the Power Rangers, but there was a bit more meticulous planning. The talent involved were these legendary voice actors, even at the time, and even through now. Turtles shows almost always attract really big names that really are like psyched to be a part of it. There's these deep, intricate stories that they would build up that would go over whole seasons. And it's just two very different approaches to the content. So in that regard, I think Turtles might be easier to go back to, just because even something like the first Ninja Turtles movie feels like there's no nice way to say this. It's like, it feels like a real movie. Whereas this just kind of feels like a longer episode of the television show.
I know it sounds like we're like being backhanded to Power Rangers. Let me be clear. I love
Chris,
this franchise.
It doesn't sound backhanded. It sounds bad.
I enjoy this movie. I have a lot of positives to talk about.
I do,
are
absolutely.
going to talk about it. But like, I don't think
you can deny it either. I don't think you can.
Yeah, you've got to acknowledge what it is. Yeah, exactly. 100%.
The CG in this movie is like laughably bad. Like it is really awful.
It's like Beast Wars level, but stuck in
Beast
like
Wars. First off, whoa. No slandering of Beast Wars on this show.
Beast Wars is not good CGI, Andrew.
Beast Wars rules. But
I'm not saying it doesn't.
As animal, all right. When they're robots, I think it looks cool. As animals, it's definitely rough. But yeah, I mean, this is 95 though. Like this is even before like big budget movies are starting to like seriously look at making CG a big part of their films and trying to make it look a certain way. And in a way, like I get it. Like obviously you got a $15 million budget. You've got limitations, and they're supposed to be robots. So in that regard, they were like, make them all shiny and stand out. But then one of them's kind of supposed to be a monster machine hybrid, and he still looks like a robot. But yeah, I mean, like we're definitely gonna have tons of positives. Don't get me wrong, but like it's definitely interesting even for me to think about that, just to like go back and. But like in that regard, like I don't go back to the original Turtles cartoon very much either. Which admittedly is like how I got into the Turtles. But if I'm going back to the Turtles, it's almost always those original movies. It's the comics. It's some of the other stuff. So like, it's all in the approach, really, at the end of the day. And I just think with Turtles, you had a lot of stuff that took a very different approach. And there's also gaps where there is no Ninja Turtle. Power Rangers being the way it is, like every year there's a new season, every year there's a new cast. And the fact that it's using Japanese footage and monsters means that you're kind of locked into a lot of stuff. I do watch Super Sentai and Kamen Rider as well. And it is interesting to see the different takes on the same material. Like Zoo Ranger, which Power Rangers is based, the original Power Rangers was based off of, is just wildly different in its approach. Like it's so like unbelievably different in what it does and the overarching story that it does create an interesting experience to contrast them together. But yeah, like I said, tons of positives still coming, but it is a very interesting thing to compare, especially now as an adult, looking back at the things that I go back towards and just seeing how much more it tends to be stuff like Ninja Turtles or even Ghostbusters more than Power Rangers.
Let's take a look at the creative team behind the movie. It is written by Arn Olson, a name, admittedly, I was not familiar with. I dug through their credits, looked at some of their other work. I didn't see much that I personally know. I did see they wrote a movie called Red Scorpion starring Dolph Lundgren, so maybe I got to check that one out. There was one called Cop and a Half, which stars Burt Reynolds, and that cover I know very well. It's like Burt Reynolds, he's a cop, and there's a little kid on his shoulders, like antagonizing him and holding up handcuffs over his eyes, like they're glasses. It looks like a kindergarten cop, knockoff, or in the wake of Kindergarten Cop, they tried to rush something similar out there. A movie I'm very familiar with from the shelves of Blockbuster, but I don't think I ever actually saw. So not much to say about Arn Olson here, but this legitimately is probably the most high profile thing that they've worked on.
I don't think there's any question it's the most high profile thing he's worked on. There's some interesting stuff here, but like by and large, occasionally still comes out, has a there was a Cop and a Half sequel a couple of years ago that starred Lou Diamond Phillips this time around. But yeah, it's not a whole lot. I can't even like pinpoint anything that would have been like the thing to be like, oh, get this guy to write the Power Rangers movie. I can't even like see something that would be like the big indicator that he's right for this job. But yeah, like I said, he's still out there doing his thing, but not exactly a known name. Definitely not like the 17 reboot where they did try to attract some previous talent.
You know what probably made him right for the job?
He was cheap.
He's cheap. The movie is directed by Brian Spicer. Now, Brian is primarily a TV director, especially these days, with some notable credits, including things like 24, CSI, and House, but a few other film credits under his belt as well, like For Richer or Poorer, that Tim Allen movie from the 90s.
Yep.
That I kind of remember. He also directed that.
He also directed the McHale's Navy movie starring Tom Arnold, which is notable for having a 3% on Rotten Tomatoes. Folks, we're not doing McHale's Navy in our TV show month.
Stop asking us.
I know it's out there. I know it's viable. We're not doing it. But he did adventures. He did some episodes of The Adventures of Briscoe County Jr. He did some Sequest 2032, Erie, Indiana, Salute Your Shorts. He's been like just a journeyman of TV directing. Episodes of pretty much tons of different shows. Still working to this day. Doing stuff with Magnum PI, the reboot of that, as well as the Hawaii Five-0 reboot. Did a bunch of episodes of Castle about 10 years ago. So just, he's out there doing his thing, but this is definitely, he had a brief run there as a film director, had 3 shots, and looks like he hasn't gone back for much since then. But again, I gotta assume, television director, relatively cheap, and
Yeah.
could get the job done. We also, I do want to shout out, we do have a story credit here for John Camps, who is, I'm guessing, wrote an earlier version of the screenplay. You can't exactly say this was gestating for a long time. This movie debuts 95, and I think the show debuted in 93. So this wasn't exactly something that had been sitting around for a long time, but I'm guessing he just did. Let's see, when did Power Rangers debut? Power Rangers debuted August 28th, 1993. So less than 2 years after the debut of the film.
That's crazy.
That's crazy. That's kind of like how Ninja Turtles 2 comes out like barely a year after the first Ninja Turtles movie, which I didn't even realize as a kid. I was like, oh, it was probably 2-3 years later. No. And the fact that this is using stuff that was like, yeah, it's pretty wild that they were able to do it that fast, but maybe it also shows a little bit. But John Camps has a few other writing credits to his name. The Borrowers, Zathura, A Space Adventure. Fun fact, folks, Zathura is a game that is on the flip side of Jumanji in the book that it's from. So if you turn the Jumanji board over, Zathura's on the other side.
What is the source material? I thought Jumanji was like made for that movie.
I don't know where that came from then. Maybe I'm lying, folks. Am I lying?
I knew Zathura was like a very similar premise to Jumanji, but I didn't think there was actually any.
Oh yeah, based on the 1981 children's picture book of the same name.
Picture book.
Jumanji. Interesting.
Jumanji is based on a picture book?
Zathura. Yeah. So Jumanji is a picture book, and there is a sequel picture book called Zathura. And it's the same setup, basically. Zathura is just the science fiction version. But I don't remember who told me, but they said that on the other side of Jumanji is Zathura.
Interesting.
So, anyway, what John Camps wrote that I want to bring up is he is a writer on the greatest film of all time with David Koepp, Premium Rush.
Great movie.
Great movie.
The greatest actor of all time.
Which one?
Shannon as the villain.
Oh, also Joseph Gordon-Levitt.
Another great.
Just all the greatest actors of all time.
All the greatest.
But David Koepp obviously directs that, and I'm guessing does a big rewrite of that script. But John Camps, I guess, wrote the original version. So from Power Rangers to the greatest film of all time. So how can you go wrong?
Well, Andrew, I think it's time. I think it's Morphin time, if you will. Let's jump into this movie. You ready?
Cowabunga, Chris. Oh.
In the city of Angel Grove, an ancient evil being is accidentally uncovered at a construction site named Ivan Ooze. Once he is released, Ooze immediately sets out to destroy the city's heroes, the Power Rangers. After breaking into their headquarters and fatally wounding their leader Zordon, the Rangers' assistant Alpha 5 uses their last remaining power to send the Rangers to the planet Phaedos in search of the Great Power. The Rangers are successful in their quest, but return to Earth to find Ivan has begun terrorizing the city and brainwashing its citizens. Now the Rangers must use their new powers and new Zords to make a final stand. Pretty simple story we got here. Nice, lean, 90-minute runtime. That synopsis, though, I had a bit of trouble getting through this with a straight face because a mutual friend of ours, Mr. Doug, a long-running joke that we've had is asking the other one what the premise of the Power Rangers movie is, because it's usually something like, well, the Power Rangers lose their power, but use the last of their power to travel and find a great power and use that power to return to Earth. On and on and on.
A lot of
power. And it's not even like being cheeky. Like in the lore of this movie, it's all called power. Like their Ranger power, their great power. Yeah. It's all power.
It is all power. And there's a running there. When Power Rangers was kind of like a building story on the same cast, every seat, it was just a different, like, we need a greater power than the one we have. Like, that was literally all it was sometimes. Like, it wasn't even that the old power got destroyed. It was that we just needed a greater power. Like, that's the purpose almost entirely in the Turbo Power Rangers movies. They're like, oh, we're just going to make a better power. And they just do. Like, it's like there's no struggle or even searching for it. They just get new powers and they don't even nothing happens to the old ones. They're still there. They just are like, hey, cool, let's go. But so honestly, you could definitely see this as like a multi-episode arc of the show, and they kind of do a version of that with Ninja Quest, which is the second arc of the third season, where the thunder powers they were using at the time are destroyed, and they have to seek out these ninja powers, and that's when they get the stuff in the show. So it is interesting as well that this is not a Batman the movie situation. This is not even, like I said, a Turbo Power Ranger situation, or even like a Transformers the movie situation in the 80s. This did not tie into the show whatsoever, which I actually think is a very interesting approach, because I felt like you would have wanted this to be the bones of the new season. But at the same time, like, you're not going to be able to use the Zord footage you have. You're not going to be able to use the suits. I can see there being a mindset of like, okay, let's just make it its own thing. But that's pretty wild, honestly, that this movie was basically its own continuity that I guess was implied building off of what had happened before, given the presence of all the villains and Zordon and everything, but it's not used going forward. Which I just think it's one of those things they said, you can't do that now. That's going to confuse the fan base. But back in the day, nobody cared, man.
Well, let's take a look at this cast, and we're going to start with the high point, best casting and best performance of the film, because every episode we recognize one person who goes above and beyond the call of duty, that they actually elevate the quality of the entire film with their performance. We recognize that person by giving them the Mark Strong Award. So, Andrew, go ahead and kick us off here. Who is getting your Mark Strong Award for Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, the movie?
There's one answer to this question. And there is only one answer to this question.
I've never been more certain of where you're going with the Mark Strong.
You know exactly where I'm going with this.
Not only is it a great pick, but it is like the most Andrew Mark Strong Award.
Yes,
maybe
they're possibly more than the original Mark Strong Award winner himself. I have to go, without a doubt, no question, with Paul Freeman as Ivan Ooze. He plays our main villain here, who has been imprisoned for 6,000 years, but yet still has an impeccable knowledge of modern pop culture. Has no issues just talking about things that happened while he was imprisoned in this giant egg. But
yes.
But he is... I don't know if I'd go as far as to say Paul Freeman understands the assignment, because I guarantee you he was like, power what? Who? What? Ooze? What? Who? He just he's like a classically trained, Shakespearean type actor. And so just seeing him here, which first off, for the longest time, I didn't connect this to anything else Paul Freeman had done. I but as a kid, I remember seeing Paul Freeman's name in the credits. And then years, like probably a good decade plus later, I was watching Raiders of the Lost Ark and it said Paul Freeman. And I was like, no way. What? It's got to be just a guy with the same name. It has to be, right? And I looked it up.
He's not purple.
No, he's got normal hair. Who is this man? But lo and behold, as Belloc from Raiders of the Lost Ark, the vain villain of that movie, outside the Nazis, who are always the big villain. But in life, folks, not just in Raiders of the Lost Ark, but yeah. He jumps into the prosthetics and the robes, and he is hamming it up to the 10th degree, and I love every single second of it. He is just literally, I don't even know if he had a script, or if they were just like, say whatever comes to your mind. But
yeah, I'm not gonna correct Paul Freeman. Let him do his thing.
Exactly. So he turns he turns what could have easily been a relatively forgettable villain into a genuine performance-wise one of the best villains of the franchise, just because there's a level of... Folks, there's no way to say this nicely. Paul Freeman is like the gap in talent. That's not to say everybody in this movie is not talented. They are, but Paul Freeman is just so far ahead, it's almost not even fair as far as it goes. He's fantastic. He knows exactly what he's going for here. He's all the dumb things he has to do, like the commercial where he's rhyming, the face-offs with other villains, everything. I have at every point he's on the screen, I'm never bored. He is making this movie far more memorable than it would have been on its own. He is the definition of the Mark Strong Award as far as I'm concerned, and I don't think there's any question. Paul Freeman as Ivan Ooze, Mark Strong.
I mean, obviously, it is a great pick. And the thing about this performance is, talk about him understanding the assignment. I don't know, because every other actor in this movie, especially the cast that's coming over from the TV show, is taking everything deadly serious. And even some of our new characters, like, they take everything at face value, right? There's no wink at the camera, nothing like that. Whereas Paul Freeman, not that he's being disrespectful like to the filmmaking process or anything, but his character gets to kind of exist outside of that world. Like you said, the pop culture references and being silly as he's destroying Power Rangers headquarters. If that was Rita, if that was Lord Zed, they would be not quipping, but they would be doing their one-note villain lines like they are known for.
Right.
But you create this character that's kind of free from all of those preconceived concepts, free from taking everything deadly serious, and it just stands out like crazy. I mean, I've always liked this character. I always liked it as a kid, but like especially watching the movie as an adult, it is a breath of fresh air, right? It kind of keeps the movie from being too much of some of the things we're trying to describe earlier as far as being like ostensively aimed at kids. So it's an excellent pick, and so much kudos to Paul Freeman, because like you said, if he was dialing it in or his heart wasn't in it, I can't tell. It looks like he's having the time of his life.
Right.
And you know that's a lot of makeup. You know that took a lot of time to go through the prosthetics and everything. And he did it. And like you said, turned in a very memorable performance.
Yeah, just the other stuff, like I said, I mentioned Raiders of the Lost Ark, but he's one of the townspeople in Hot Fuzz. He plays the Reverend. And he's briefly in that movie because there's so many people that are members of the town, but I just remember the scene where he gets shot, and he just gets shot and goes, Jesus! And like as he falls over. And it just always makes me laugh, where he just like, first off, he comes up to these guys with guns and gets shot himself, and he seems shocked by it, but just his reaction always gets me. So Paul Freeman, greatest actor of all time. But Chris, go ahead and rip the Band-Aid off, because it certainly sounds like you're not giving it to Paul Freeman.
Well, listen, if you had asked 8-year-old Chris, who's the Mark Strong, who's the MVP, who's the best performance in the Power Rangers movie, I'm saying Jason David Frank. I'm saying the White Ranger. You ask 30-something-year-old Chris, I'm still giving it to Jason David Frank, baby. Still the coolest mofo in this movie.
Folks, Chris is lying.
He's my Mark
lying
Strong
to
award.
you. He is lying. No question.
Listen, is it nostalgia talking? Maybe.
Yes.
And also, who cares? I watched.
Paul Freeman deserves the double award.
He has the award, Andrew. You made sure he got it.
Double.
And he deserves it.
Double.
I am giving my Mark Strong award to Jason David Frank. He is the reason I loved the Power Rangers as a kid. And whenever I watch this movie, yes, I'm all the praise to Ivan Ooze, and I'm being entertained by that character. But the nostalgic part that I'm connecting with this movie, which is how I connect to Power Rangers. If I'm going to watch some old Power Rangers, it's to get into that nostalgic mood and think back fondly on what the show meant to me. And no one represents that more than Jason David Frank. Just the absolutely coolest dude. He is the one, like as a kid, when I watched the Power Rangers, he's the one like I believed was a martial artist. I believed this actor was doing these things, in which, I mean, they do those things, but it was believable. I mean, he looked cool, long hair, cool look. He always had like the implied romance with Kimberly. That's very cool. Coolest suit. Just the epitome of being the coolest dude on the show. I was a little surprised watching this movie back as an adult, because like performance-wise, and even what the movie's given to him, it's not that much more than the other Rangers. Like, we know he's the leader, but there's not like solo scenes, and he doesn't get like his own separate arc. He's just one of the Rangers, you know? But like in my mind, it's always like, dude, it's the Tommy show. It's always about Tommy. And Andrew, you're obviously lore-wise a little more familiar with the Power Rangers than me. I haven't revisited it too much, but Power Ranger starts out, Red Ranger is the leader.
Yes.
Tommy comes in, villain at first, turned good guy, kind of like co-leaders with the Red Ranger, but by the time we switch out to Rocky, I mean, it's just Tommy's
there's no
the
question.
leader, right?
There's no question. It starts off with just the 5, and we have the original Zach, Trini, Jason as the original red, black, and yellow Rangers. It's Green with Evil, I think, where the Green Ranger is introduced. I think that really is like the turning point for the show. I think that's where it genuinely turns from like, this is a new thing that kids seem to like, into like, this is a phenomenon. The Green Ranger starting out as a villain and then becoming a hero. I can't deny that what you're saying about Tommy is correct. That made the show so much cooler. Like, that Green with Evil run starts with Tommy basically doing what Ivan Ooze is doing. Like, he comes in and just wrecks like, just plows right through these guys. Like, there's no question. Like, Zordon gets banished from his tube, which happens a whole bunch of times. Like they lose Zordon because it's like a communication from somewhere that we never figure out where. But they lose Zordon, so there's the command center gets destroyed. Like there's this ongoing conflict that is at place here, and it is, they eventually overcome and succeed, but it's a 5-part episode series, like, of a children's show. Like, that was so weird to me that, like, Green with Evil was 5 parts. That means it's literally as long as this movie, as far as that story is. It's 140 minutes, 150 minutes, or an hour, 40 minutes. And it's wild, but there's definitely tension there where, like, you're not sure who's in charge. But then the Green Ranger ends up leaving because the Green Ranger character disappears from the source footage. In Zoo Ranger, the Green Ranger, spoilers, or should I not spoil it?
I think you can spoil. You're spoiling the original Japanese show right now. Yeah,
yes,
go ahead.
I'm spoiling Zoo Ranger. The Green Ranger dies at one point because the Green Ranger and the Red Ranger are brothers in Zoo Ranger, and that's what makes the tension in the Zoo Ranger so much more personal, because it's 2 brothers that are fighting. Same idea though. Dude gets controlled by the bad guy, is the villain, eventually turns to the good side, but he does not survive the whole show. And the powers are passed to the Red Ranger, which is how you get, like, the Red Ranger with the dragon shield and stuff, and how suddenly Jason was cool now because he had the shield. Suddenly it was cool. They did a lot of workarounds to try and get around that because the Green Ranger was so popular. But there's this period of time where he leaves the show as a ranger, and he kind of comes back, and then he disappears again. And then he kind of comes back as the Green Ranger one more time, but his powers are, like, sketchy. But you can tell it's all American footage because it's the American suit with the floppy shield. And they're really, you can tell they're just trying to, like, work around the fact that Green Ranger wasn't in it, but he's the most popular part of the show, and they still had to figure it out. And then he finally leaves, quote unquote, for good. But then that's what leads to the White Ranger showing up. And when Tommy shows up as the White Ranger, I think that's really where, like, the question is gone. Tommy is in charge here. Once he shows up as the White Ranger, which that suit ironically comes from the next season of the Japanese show, not the same one the Power Ranger suits are from. It comes from the next season. That's where the Thunder Zords also come from. That's when the moment you're like, Tommy's in charge. There's no question. It's not debatable. And then especially when Jason leaves, that's really when you're like, Tommy was the man at that point. I mean, he'd always been the man, but that was the moment. So in this movie, though, like, he's in charge. He's the guy. Even without, like I said, though, like you pointed it out, though, the Rangers are, like, never apart in this movie. They're really not. Like, they are in a group. They are skydiving together. They are rollerblading together. They are fighting together. They are seeking the great power together. They are fighting Ivan Ooze together. Like, there is no question. It is interesting. But I did notice that watching it, that, like, they're really kind of all given roughly the same amount of dialogue. They're not really a few, like, Tommy and Kimberly maybe get a little bit more, but, like, it's really pretty evenly distributed. And a lot of the Rangers really are just kind of there. But Tommy, he does manage to stand out, and he's said, you can tell he's in charge.
Yeah, he is. And he's still the coolest part. I was watching this movie with a friend of the show, my wife, and I can't tell you the last time I've watched this movie. Maybe once, maybe twice as an adult, mostly from my childhood. But, like, I'm quoting lines left and right. Like, I know the dialogue that's coming up. I remember the ninja corkscrew kick before he hits the Stone Warrior. Like,
how did you know he could do that?
Yeah, he could feel the power, Andrew. Or I got a bone to pick with you. It's great. He's just my favorite. He's the reason I love the Power Rangers. And I do love I went to a Power Rangers, like, live show, like, stage show as a kid. Like, man, huge part of my childhood. And Jason David Frank, just the coolest man. And of course, R.I.P. Jason David Frank passed away last year. It is just incredibly, incredibly sad, incredibly tragic. And you hear it all the time. Anytime a high profile celebrity death happens, there's always someone who has the qualifier, like, hey, normally celebrity deaths don't affect me, but this one's like a big, whatever. And, like, first of all, a lot of celebrity deaths affect me, not because they're celebrities, just because if their art was something that I consumed regularly, that is enough to be a personal touch. I know I don't know them as a person, but I appreciated their art, and it's sad when the artist dies, and it really doesn't need to be more complicated than that. So a quick aside, if you see someone saying they're upset about a celebrity death, don't feel the need to jump in there and say, hey, you didn't know them personally. Let someone be sad or be upset about something, but
don't be that guy, or don't be that person. I won't gender it. Don't be that person. Nobody likes that person. Trust me. Like, you may think you're making a point, and maybe you are, but just don't. Just don't. We as a society need to understand that the best thing we can do sometimes is just don't.
Jason David Frank is one that just stuck with me. It just really, it's one of those things like you hear. This was one that was like a rumor for like almost 24 hours. Almost confirmed.
A day,
and you're kind of just hoping it's not true, but there's that sinking feeling where you know it is. And then there's that realization that everything is, you're never going to see them as a character again. You're never going to hear from them again. Then you get think about them like personally, like their family. And there's maybe a little bit more connection with me because I live in Houston, which is where Jason David Frank lived, and his kids are here. Like, it's just, no matter how you look at it, it's so incredibly tragic. And it's just a real like bummer that forever now, when I'm going to consume Power Rangers media that has him in it, like, this is part of the legacy. I'm just going to think about how his life eventually ended. And it really bums me out. But his work while he was alive, let me pull my stuff together here. As Tommy Oliver, as the White Ranger or Green Ranger or whatever other incarnation, throughout literally like to the end, you can talk about your little controversies here, his relationships with some of the cast members or the legacy, the thing coming out, but like really none of that matters now. What really matters is that he was always doing conventions, talking to fans, doing like fan films, just really carrying the torch of this character, this franchise. And R.I.P. Jason David Frank. Mark Strong Award winner, Jason David Frank.
All right, I'm going to talk for a bit while Chris pulls himself together here. No, you Turkish prison. But you're absolutely correct, and arguably you could talk about how that dedication or that ownership he felt may have been part of the issue he had with some of the other cast members. We don't know. It had all kind of been very unsaid for the most part, but like, these people would do conventions together and they were always cordial, but you can't deny, like, I met Jason David Frank twice. I met him once at a anime convention in Austin, and then I met him again at a convention in Houston. And both times, just an absolute, like, he was excited to meet you. He'd take pictures, he'd sign whatever you had. And when and I'd kind of, I'm not going to pretend, I'm not going to sugarcoat it myself. I was kind of over some of the stuff. Like, he made this whole big post where he was like, done with Power Rangers. I've given them enough of my time. I'm moving on to my own stuff. And that was actually something, like, they shot that anniversary special last fall. He chose not to be in it because he said he had moved on from the franchise. And but obviously there was a lot going on there that we didn't know about. I think at the end of the day, that's kind of, if there's one thing to take away, it's that you didn't have the full story, and we never have the full story at the end of the day. It's similar to kind of some of the stuff you started hearing about Bruce Willis after people found out about his issues that he'd been having, and it kind of reframed things. And when you realize that Jason David Frank is struggling with these various ailments, the things that were kind of plaguing him, you have no idea how much that ultimately ends up impacting certain things. But I can't, like I said, the first Halloween costume that I remember, I think, wearing 2 years in a row was my Green Ranger costume. And I had all that stuff. And I met him twice. I thankfully, when he he passed, I was like, oh man, did I keep that autograph? I really hope I did. And thankfully I found it. So I have it, and I'm going to make sure that it is in a safe place, because he said it to my friend Andrew, and so we're friends. I can't let that go. He said it. I'm going to choose to believe it till I die. But it's unfortunate. The last shot of this movie is just Tommy, Kimberly, and whoever that kid is. But and like it sits there and it lingers on it, and I was like, don't do this to me. Come on. But at the same time, he got to come back to the show a lot. There is a lot of pieces that he got to be a part of, a lot of seasons that he got to be a part of. And even when they were doing the comics, where they introduced a more evil version of Tommy called Lord Drakon, he shot a little teaser in character as that guy, where he got to wear like his pretty dope suit and all of that. And that is that's cool. And again, you're talking about this stuff is, just a couple of years old. And it's I do believe he had his reasons for wanting to move on. Part of that, he said he didn't like having to cover up his tattoos. He had a giant tattoo on his forearm that said Jesus didn't tap. I always thought that was funny / weird, but
well, it would
you're
definitely
technically correct. But
it's it's whatever. It's fine as a tattoo for him, but like the idea of Tommy Oliver having something like that, specific would be a funny visual. So I get the character not having a tattoo.
He also had a really I thought it was really funny, but I don't know if you've heard of the show We Bear Bears. No, but it's a show about these 3 different types of bears and all their weird hijinks. But there's an episode where Tommy Oliver or Jason David Frank cameos as Silver Bear, who is very clearly meant to be like a Power Rangers bear. And he just basically is jumping in with these guys while they're playing like make believe, and like you're watching them like fight monsters and everything as these superheroes with Silver Bear in tow. But then it cuts back to the real world, and they just like destroyed somebody's car. Like it's things like that where they're like destroy the monster, and then it cuts back and somebody's like, what the heck? Like I was trying to drive home, and just a very funny little homage to Power Rangers there, and it was animated, so he didn't have to cover up his tattoos. But it is now unfortunate. But as with all things of this nature, I hope he is now at peace. Obviously, like I said, there was a lot more going on there than any of us knew about. And that's something that I think is also important to remember, is that we don't know. We just don't. We have fandoms in general, I think, have a very I don't necessarily think it's malicious, but we just believe we know more than we do about almost everything. We speak about things with a certainty that's not really earned or deserved. But especially in a situation like this, I think it's a good reminder that maybe take a step back, because we don't know. You know the things that you know, but there's this greater picture that we're never going to understand. And in that regard, like I said, it's unfortunate. It's definitely going to make viewing things a little bit more difficult. I rewatched Forever Red a couple days ago, just because they put that up on YouTube, where all the Red Rangers came back. Except Rocky didn't answer his phone, but even that, just seeing him and Jason back in the same thing again, it was just, you go back to when you were a kid, and that's literally, you were waking up at 7 a.m. because the new episode of Power Rangers was on, or you're trying to get home from school because the new episode of Power Rangers was on. And I felt like I was sitting at my house as a kid. Like, my parents used to have this big old CRT TV, one of those TVs that sat on the ground, not like on a stand. It was one of the ones that sat on the ground.
It's like built-in furniture.
Almost, yeah. And I just remember it. I lived outside Pittsburgh at the time, and I remember I would wake up, I would run downstairs, and I would watch Power Rangers, or I would get home from school and I'd watch Power Rangers. Man, that was That was the time. Chris, I'm going to get sad. Let's move on. Sadder, to be clear. I'm already sad.
Let's talk about the rest of the Rangers. Like Amy Jo Johnson, who plays Kimberly, the Pink Ranger. Man, like every young boy's first crush, probably, before, like, I mean, I was watching Power Rangers where, like, I didn't really have a crush, like, liking girls wasn't what it would become, you know, but, like, you just knew that she was cool and pretty, and I really like her performance as Kimberly in this movie. You talk about the Rangers are mostly on the level playing field. She kind of gets this elevated arc where she is the most torn up about Zordon, and she gets to say the things like he was like a father to us and mourn him a little bit more when it looks like he's going to perish. And that little bit of extra that they give her, she absolutely nails it and is kind of really the heart of this movie or of that team. And, you know, kudos to Amy Jo Johnson for that.
Absolutely. And it's interesting because she's one of the ones that kind of left the show and really hasn't looked back too much. She started doing conventions and things like that, but she's never come back to the show. She was asked for the reunion, chose not to participate. If I had to assume, it was probably a money thing, which she knows what she's worth. I respect it completely. But still out there. Occasionally shows up, had a big role on a show called Flashpoint for a great many years. And then even directed an episode of Superman and Lois last year. So
that's cool.
Jumping into the director's chair. But you are correct. I think she is definitely kind of the heart of the team on this movie. Like I said, she's given that kind of more personal arc. And to be fair, like none of the other cast members are really given anything like that, to be fair. But it's important for the film. It makes it feel a little bit more personal, like the attachment is there. And man, she is crying on screen and everything. She is torn up about this. So putting in the work with that performance, and it shows.
David Yost as Billy, the Blue Ranger. One of my favorite Power Rangers. I know there's like 6 to choose from, but I think Blue Ranger might be number 2. And I think what I'd like about him, and I'm trying to word this without being backhanded to like every other Ranger, but he has just a more distinguished character. And a lot, you talk about the characters being simple, kids, TV show, almost one note. He's kind of like the nerd, I guess, but it's never like a punchline. He's not dorky or getting picked on by the other Rangers. He's just a little nerdy, maybe smart, like, intelligent, book smart. And I don't know, that's just enough to like make him stand out from the rest of them and give him a lot of relatability. To it sounds like I'm calling myself really smart, but as a kid, just a nerd that is also really good at martial arts is like the coolest thing to aspire to as a nerdy kid, Yeah,
absolutely. He definitely stands out for me. I don't really he's not necessarily given a whole lot more to do, but I think just the fact that he was one of the old OGs at this point. Him and Kimberly are really, by the time this movie comes around, the only people that have been there since day one. And Tommy obviously is pretty close to day one, but still not technically there at day one. But it is I like his performance here. I think he does stand out. He gets some fun quips, some less fun quips, but he's I've always liked Billy a lot too. Obviously he had a bit more of a troubled relationship with the show towards the end. But he is one of the Rangers that will be taking part in the 30th anniversary special. It will be his first appearance in a Power Rangers production since 1996. So a long time coming for him, and I'm actually kind of glad that he gets to come back and reconcile his time on the show kind of in his own way. It actually looks like, from all indications, he's kind of the lead of that special. He's kind of front and center for it, which I'm here for. So I'm all about it. So, but yeah, Billy here. I'm never going to be sad to see David Yost's Billy on my screen.
Johnny Young Bosch is Adam the Black Ranger, one of the newcomers to the role, and I liked him a lot as a kid, like in this movie. Honestly, for one specific scene, it's whenever they get all of their new Zords, their new like great power animals, and they're checking them out. And he's like sad about his, and Dulcia asks him what's wrong, and he says, "I'm a frog." And he's like upset about the animal that he got.
Yep.
It was the funniest thing in the world to me. And I really like that scene. So it made me have like a soft spot for Adam here.
Yeah, Johnny Young Bosch is another one who has come back to the show a couple of times since he left. Came back in Power Rangers in Space. Actually came back, I think, for the 20th anniversary special in 2007 would have been 15th. Oh my god. So he did show up a couple of times afterward. And also Johnny Young Bosch has made a lucrative other career as an English voiceover dub for anime, notably doing Vash the Stampede on one of the original dubs of Trigun, which that's the main character for anybody who's not familiar. He's done characters on Naruto. He did the lead character of Bleach anime. So and even that's something he's still doing, and he still plays Vash the Stampede anytime they do Trigun stuff. For the most part, he's in Bleach, all that stuff. Anytime he's in those things appear, he is pretty much involved. But he also will be rejoining us for the 30th anniversary special. But yeah, his reaction to being the frog, I still remember vividly in my head. Just the frog. I still remember it vividly. And yeah, fun stuff.
Karen Ashley plays Aisha, the Yellow Ranger. Another good performance. A couple of things that stand out with the Yellow Ranger here. One is she has like these built-in headlights on her helmet. I so distinctly remember her like turning those on, and me as a kid being like, "Wow, I never knew that her helmet had that," as if like they had always been there, and like we were just finding out about it in this movie. But I was like, "Oh, cool!" Yeah, I'm learning more about the Power Rangers here. But yeah, that was real distinct, and she's another one that I think they're all believable, like with their martial, like when you see them fighting without their suits. But her maybe a little bit more so. I think she really stands out, like in the combat scenes. But good stuff.
Yeah, she's along with Johnny Young Bosch. Johnny Young Bosch, her, and Steve Cardenas, who we'll talk about in a second. They were kind of the second wave of Rangers to join the cast. That is actually something I just find interesting about this movie. We'll talk about it more during the scenes, but just they give all the Rangers, except maybe the White Ranger, like a weird thing that you've never seen them use before, like ever.
Yeah,
like it's so weird. We'll talk about that in a minute more, but yeah, she definitely gets to stand out, have some good spotlights during the action sequence. The action sequences of this movie are all pretty good. They definitely make the most of them. Not a huge career beyond this, some guest appearances in some other shows in the kind of late 90s, early 2000s. But she'll also be coming back. Her and Adam are looking like they're members of a different group in this new special. But glad to see that she's embraced it. She does conventions and stuff, but she's also not really come back to the show. So to have her back in the fold for an episode as well is definitely going to be fun.
Steve Cardenas plays Rocky, the Red Ranger, our second Red Ranger in the lineage of the Power Rangers. And again, it's weird because by this point, it's clear Tommy's the leader. It's not even, he doesn't even feel like he's number two. It's like Tommy, and then the rest of them. It's interesting to see how the Red Ranger's role changed.
Yeah, he's our second Red Ranger. We established that. He is eventually becomes the Blue Ranger because they solved that whole issue with the Red Ranger when they switched to the Zeo powers. They just make Tommy the Red Ranger. They're like, all right, fixed. When do we solve the problem? Tommy's just now the leader. But he jumps in as our second Red Ranger, eventually becomes the Blue Ranger. And he's another one. He's in Power Rangers Turbo, in Turbo Power Rangers movie, he like breaks his back. And that's how the kid gets put on the team. And he ends up kind of sitting out. He's in a few episodes of the show, I think, maybe 3. But then he also sat out for a long time. But for the 25th anniversary special, he got to get back into the fold as the Red Ranger there. With that was the one that was Jason David Frank's ultimately last appearance, as well as Tommy Oliver, where he gets to fight himself. So if I can't think of a much better end for Jason David Frank's career in Power Rangers than a fight with himself, which not the first time that's happened either. But yeah, he's I don't mean this so backhandedly, but he's definitely one of the large group that kind of fades into the background. There's a few lines there. Obviously, the action is great. He's got some cool stuff that he does. But yeah, he's definitely one that feels like there wasn't a whole lot for him in the script. So I don't really think it's any fault of his, but he's definitely just one of the characters that ended up just kind of being there.
May as well talk about these next two together. You have Paul Schreier and Jason Narvi as Bulk and Skull, respectively. The lovable bullies, I guess they are, but in this movie, they don't really bully the Power Rangers. They're just kind of dorks that you check in on every now and then throughout the movie. But they annoyed me as a kid, which I guess they were supposed to. I guess you're just not supposed to like them. And you just wait for them to get their comeuppance, like when they, slip on a banana peel and ice cream falls on their head or whatever wacky thing happens to them. But kudos to both these actors just for going all in on these two characters, like just making themselves as annoying and unappealing as
no
reservations,
no shame, no anything.
Absolutely,
and we're better for
it. I've got to admire on some level whatever writer decided that they're gonna name their fat guy character Bulk. I mean, really just hitting the nail on the head with that
not
one.
even questioning it. Then the thin one's called Skull. But no, actually, the thing I love about Jason Narvi, who plays Skull, is that he has a master's degree, and he studied with like the American Shakespeare Center. Did a whole bunch of Henry VI stuff. He's like certified from the British Academy of Stage and Screen Combat. He's got a PhD in theater studies, and he's like, Jason Narvi is like hardcore, like trained actor. And it actually, if you watch the show, it kind of also shows there where like his comedic timing and the stuff that he shows off is really pretty underrated. People don't talk about it enough. And Paul Schreier is just, these guys, they were on the show for a really long time. I think through Lost Galaxy, which was season 6 or 7. They had a cameo in the Forever Red episode that I just think is super funny. And then Bulk actually comes back in a main role during Power Rangers Samurai. So these guys have just got a long, huge relationship with the show. They've not been announced for the 30th anniversary special. I hope there's something. I need to hear that theme song one more time. You know it, Chris. You know it.
Yeah.
I just want to hear it in my life. But I always love these two. They're not in the movie very often. They kind of get a big moment at the end to kind of help save the day, where really all they're doing is delaying until the Power Rangers save the day. But hey, that's what everybody in the DC universe does with Superman. Stall until Superman gets here. So don't fear, guys. Even the pros do it. But I love these two guys. I'm never sad to see them.
And I mean, there's a lot of cast we could go through, a lot of voice roles and other characters making small appearances that were in the TV show. But as far as our main cast, main players, I think there's one more we got to cover. It is a new character to the franchise by the name of Dulcia, played by Gabrielle Fitzpatrick. And man, talk about crushes you have as a kid. What a character. Friend of the show, my wife, was watching the movie with me, and she just could not get over this woman's outfit. And I gotta agree, I think for the first time watching it as an adult, I'm like, man, you see a lot of skin. You see like inner hips. Like, it is a really skimpy outfit. It is kind of wild that they felt the need to do that in a kid's movie. And also, it's just the old trope of like in fantasy, men's armor is like a suit of armor and women's armor is like a metal brawl. Like it makes no sense.
Yeah.
It's all sex appeal. It's an outdated trope. I'll acknowledge that. But genuinely, beyond all that stuff, I love the performance. Her really bringing some gravitas to this movie. She gets to do like the opening scroll narration and just is like this wise character that you believe with her performance. And it must have been wild to give that performance and have to wear that costume.
Oh, yeah.
But honestly, always stood out to me. She has this line that has been burned into my brain my whole life. And I've literally like repeated it in casual conversation anytime I get a chance to use it. It's when they first arrive on the planet and tell her they're looking for the great power. And she says, "The ground is littered with the bones of those who have tried for it and failed." And I just always loved that because there's literally skeletons all over. And the ground is littered with the bones. That is some cool, gnarly stuff. Delivered wonderfully by Gabrielle.
Yes, I agree. Actually, I don't know if you knew this, Chris, but somebody else was cast in this role first.
I did. As a big SVU fan, Andrew,
you gotta
know the trivia.
But yes, SVU alum Mariska Haggerty was originally cast in this role. I do believe there are some set photos circulating somewhere.
There are. You can Google it. See her in that suit.
And
yeah.
you should. But unfortunately, she was not able to take part in filming. I forget exactly what happened.
She told the story, I think, on like Oprah, some talk show. Like she revealed that story, and she said she was really young, early in her career. She got the job. She flew out to Australia where they were filming, and then it was like a holiday break. It was like New Year's, or whatever, and she like flew back home because she wanted to see her family, and they just like never called her to come back.
Oh, that's
because
a bummer.
she left the scene. Where they were filming, they just recast her with a local because that was easier than flying her back out.
That is unfortunate. But yeah, so anyway, Gabrielle Fitzpatrick, yeah, she comes in, obviously, I guess under some controversy, but she's also local to Australia. That's what you'll find with pretty much anybody that's not Paul Freeman or the original Rangers or Voices, that they're all local Australian actors, which I'm sure just even on travel costs alone are much cheaper and easier to use. But the way I remember the first time my mom saw this movie, she said that this character was put in the movie for all the dads that were forced to take their kids to watch it.
Jesus.
I mean, I was like, come on. I mean, I don't want to say that you're entirely wrong, but we don't have to say it out
she's
loud.
Probably right, and it's sad that she's right and recognizes that, It's
one of those things where it's like, you might be right, but you can't just say it out loud like that. But yeah, I just remember this character obviously stood out to me as a kid. But it's also just cool. Like, the Power Rangers are, like, losing really badly, and she comes in and, like, single-handedly beats these guys. That's awesome. Twists, swirls her sticks around. And yeah, I just think it's really cool. There's some stuff about the character I definitely want to talk about, but I'll wait until we're into the scenes and stuff. But yeah, just a cool character. One and done, near as I can tell, much like Ivan Ooze, did not come back around. Don't know if maybe they've shown up in the comics. That's very possible. The comics definitely leave room for stuff like this to be explored, and maybe one day they will. But I definitely think it's always interesting to see new characters come into the shows. So this was no exception.
Well, Andrew, let's go ahead and go ahead and talk about those scenes. And specifically, we will start with our favorite scenes of the film, and what we consider the best scene. So, Andrew, in your opinion, when is this movie firing on all cylinders? What is your favorite scene in, say it one more time, Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, the movie?
There's a lot of really fun scenes in this movie that I like, just nostalgic, but also in general. But my favorite has got to be anytime Ivan Ooze is on. But trying to narrow it down to like a specific thing, kind of his introduction. I think it's not really a scene, but just kind of his intro arc. I just really like, because it's like Villain 101. where like they're just going through all the motions here. Well, first off, he introduces himself to the heroes. So I'm going to cheat. I'm going to actually put his 3 things together here. But he introduces himself to our heroes, and the heroes are like gung-ho to be like, all right, we're going to stop you. And he's like, whatever. I don't care.
I think the specific dialogue is, we're the Power Rangers. And he says, woo, where's my autograph book?
Exactly. So like he's not at all threatened by Power Rangers. And just, yeah, Ivan Ooze just has some really, really great quips in this movie. It genuinely makes me laugh. But so after this, he has some of his ooze monsters fight the Rangers while he goes to the command center, waltzes right in, no question, and just wrecks
I would argue that he oozes right in, Andrew. Slips between those crevices.
Chris, you remember what I told you a couple episodes ago?
Just squeezes through the cracks.
Jesus. So yes, after Ooze oozes his way by oozing through the door with Ooze, he has a confrontation with Zordon, and this is the thing I was kind of talking about. It's like there's this implied history, this world outside of it that I just think is like, that's honestly interesting to me. Just there's this lore that's kind of implied and hinted at, but never really explored. Because like Lord Zed knows who Ivan Ooze is. Rita kind of doesn't know who Ivan Ooze is. Lord Zed thinks Ivan Ooze is obviously this great thing that's going to help them. Doesn't think for a second he's going to turn his back on him. But then Ivan Ooze knows who Zordon is, because Zordon put Ivan Ooze in the egg. So there's this long history between them. And then both Zordon and Ivan Ooze know who Zordon is. And Zordon and Ivan Ooze knows who Dulcia is. So like there's this strange, like they're scattered all over the universe, but they somehow know each other. And I was just like, this is so weird. How does this work? And it's just very interesting to me. Like there's this whole background that we just don't know. And I don't know if it ever got explored. But ultimately, this leads to Ivan Ooze just destroying the command center in very classic bad guy fashion. Zordon's power tube goes away. In this version, Zordon is present in the command center. Like like I said in the show, they would lose like their feed to Zordon, and he would be like lost in the grid, and they'd have to try to find him. In this version, it's a little bit different, where that like he's in like a cryo tube or something. I forget what Billy says exactly, but he's in some sort of like cryo chamber, and he is now aging outside of it, but he's physically there. Like they see him, which is the first time that's a new thing as well. And then obviously this leads to kind of the last piece of this, where Ivan Ooze goes to Lord Zed and Rita. And he shows up, and Zed is all like, aha, we've done it, blah, 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 blah. And Ivan Ooze is like, basically just supplants him as the leader. Like there's no question. Ivan Ooze just assumes, well, I'm in charge now. And when they try to oppose him, nothing. Like Lord Zed zaps him with his Z staff. It tickles. That's exactly what Ivan Ooze says. Just again, we're completely establishing that this guy is on a completely different level. And it's like I said, it's Villain 101, where you do establish that this guy is not to be messed with. And they do that in a very quick fashion. These are very quick, rapid fire scenes. And yeah, it is no question that Ivan Ooze is big, bad, and he is way above all of these people. And the quips, and obviously Paul Freeman's performance, it's all really fun. Makes it interesting. And obviously as a kid, just you're like, oh man, this dude's bad news. And you're like, what are they going to do? Obviously they have to seek a greater power. That's what they always do. So yeah, Ivan Ooze for the win.
Him destroying the command center, like that very classic bad guy stuff, where for him it's like a whimsical flick of the wrist, but it's causing all this destruction. But whenever he is lamenting all of the things that he's missed out on because he's been trapped in that egg, like the Renaissance or the Brady Bunch reunion. Again,
the things
like,
he
how
says,
does he know what that is? I don't know, but it is hilarious.
He mentions the Spanish Inquisition. He mentions the Black Plague. Like he says he's had a Charlie horse since the Renaissance. And it's just like, man, like, I guess he gets cable in there, but I don't know. But yeah, it reminds me of like Riddler in Batman Forever, where he's just like traipsing around the Batcave, blowing it up, just ridiculous, over the top, having a ball with it. And just, it got a very similar energy. It's all working for me.
It's good. It's amazing to me, like, how much new stuff they actually get into this movie. I mean, Ivan Ooze, entirely new character. And, you know, his egg and that giant hand prop, and then all of his goons, 2 different types of goons. We have like goons made of ooze, then we have like the bird goons, and then we have like a whole other planet. Suits get upgraded. Like, there's a lot of $15 million is a modest budget for a movie, but for a kid that like wanted to see new Power Ranger stuff, they get the most out of it. I mean, they brought us a lot of new stuff. So Andrew, you're cheating a little bit with your favorite scene, but I get where those scenes are all linked to the same energy and this introduction of a new character, and I can't say I'm surprised that it is your favorite scene in the movie. It's a great pick. I'm gonna go a different direction. I'm gonna go with some more straight up action, in particular on the planet Phaedos, seeking out the great power. They get their new ninja suits, which is like gives them some power, I guess. I don't. The level of power is all over the place here, but we got a cool new look for the Rangers. We're in a foreign land, something we haven't seen before, and they're fighting things that we have never seen before, like skeleton dinosaurs, because it's the 90s and we have to get dinosaurs in this movie somehow. Super memorable. As a kid, like them fighting that, like I said, I got a bone to pick with you, and pulling out that one bone, you know, that connects your entire body together. If you lose that one bone, your body falls apart. He finds it. Yeah. On that skeleton. And of course, they got to fight those stone warriors, and
which is awesome.
So cool. And they all really get to show off like their genuine martial arts skills. I don't know how much of this is the actor and their skills, their stunt double. I don't know. Like, is that Steve Cardenas doing the splits when they throw a spear at him?
It looks like him.
See his eyes. It looks like him. It's very impressive. It is him. And then, of course, Jason David Frank doing his thing, like the corkscrew kick and whatever else. I really like the jokes in this movie. I don't know if they're funny to me still, because they were funny to me as a kid. But, like, whenever that one guy gets cut in half, and then Billy drops down behind him and raises his fist and says, "Talk about a splitting headache."
Yep.
Still funny to me.
I also just when he does that, his ninja suit looks so baggy. I just remember that it looks like it suddenly grew. It grew 3 sizes. But no, I do like this fight because everybody kind of gets a moment. Like, obviously, Tommy takes out the last one.
8-ball, corner pocket.
And then he shoots it right in the middle. But I almost texted you that right after that scene happened. Like, 8-ball, quarter pocket. You hit it in the middle, you would have lost that game, Tommy. But obviously, Billy and Adam kind of double team the one that they split in half by teaming up together, and they all kind of team up. That's kind of the thing. They all eventually kind of get a moment to take out one of these things, and I just think that's cool. And but yeah, this whole fight really fun.
Really good stuff. Of course, they get their new powers, their new animals. I guess the one thing, if you're a big fan of the show, you go to the movie, you don't get to see the Zords on screen. That's kind of a bold choice.
It is.
No Megazord that you're familiar with, and no practical Zords. I mean,
none.
As a kid, that certainly did not bother me.
Right.
As an adult, I'm kind of like, man, I wish we had like a big guy in a suit fighting at the end here, instead of the CG that is so dated by now. Yeah. But of course, at the time, it just looked incredible. So, we didn't care back then. But they get the new Zords, and then they come back to find that Ivan Ooze has created these giant minions that are just, I always call them ants. They're like 2 giant ants, right? Even though one stands upright.
One's a bee, one's a scorpion.
Are you serious?
A scorpion and a hornet.
Oh, okay. One does have the scorpion tail.
I think it's a scorpion and the hornet joke. I think that's the whole thing.
I've always called them ants, Andrew. To this day, I just assumed they were
one clearly has wings.
It's an ant with... Some ants have wings, Andrew, and then the other ant has a tail.
Moving on.
This is honestly a revelation to me. I didn't know they were based on anything.
One is clearly a scorpion and has pincers.
I thought those were I don't know why I still thought it was an ant, but I did.
You're killing me. I am literally dying.
Ants have little pincers in their mouth, right?
Yeah,
like, sure. I know you're talking about the claws, like hands, but like their little mouth that clicks together.
And the scorpion doesn't have those.
But in the movie, that has it.
The scorpion doesn't. The bee does.
Well, this is you're leading me credence by me calling it an ant because it has the little claw things in the mouth.
No, only one of them has the claw things in the mouth.
So they come back to fight these two giant ants. And this is when the movie really goes into like CG land because you've got the two giant metal bad guys. You've got all the Zords, and then eventually you get Ivan Ooze. But I want to get the hashtag positivity podcast. I want to throw a shout out to some of the SFX here because there's a shot early on where you see the bugs doing destruction downtown. And you have a shot of like people panicking and cars left in the road. And there's a taxi in the street. And in the reflection of the taxi, you see the bug shooting fire. That is a detail they did not have to do. It was probably not easy to do in 1995, but it's just that much more to like sell these creatures being in the scene. So I really appreciated that little detail they threw in there.
I agree. I think it's actually a very cool thing. And I mean, like I said, as a kid, it just looked awesome. I never questioned it for a second. But but yeah, this whole, like I said, there's one sequence that I've always thought was interesting. It's when the Megazord gets like thrown through a building. That's like the one sequence where it genuinely looks like it's like a prop Megazord. It's so weird. It's like a brief little flash, but the Megazord like flies out this other side of the building. And you can see that like the legs are like the toy legs on the Ninja Megazord. And I've always thought that was so weird because it's like a one brief moment where it's like we actually threw a Megazord dummy through a glass window to get this shot. And then obviously it crashed to the ground. It's back to CG. But overall, this Megazord is completely CG. This is, I do think it's interesting you point out that we don't see the Thunder Zords at any time. And also, interestingly enough, we get a whole new power with all new animals, and the suits are the same. It's still,
which I'm fine with.
Sure. At that point, they're the classic suits at that point. But
yeah,
I did think it was interesting that, like, at that point, they were still dedicating to like the changing of the power does not change the suits because in the show, those suits don't change until they go to Zeo, which is season 4. The White Ranger suit I mentioned is newer, but those 5 suits, the core 5, they stay that way. So by the second and third seasons, a lot of that Ranger footage has to be American shot because the White Ranger does not have footage with those other 5 Rangers because they're not from the same show. Now these Zords that we're getting, these Ninja Zords, are from the season that follows the Thunder Zord. See, Zoo Ranger is our first season. Die Ranger is where the Thunder Zords come from. That's kind of a martial arts based series. And then we get to this third one, which is Kaku Ranger, which is just ninjas, really. But the Kaku Ranger suits become the Alien Rangers. If
Andrew, you are full on Charlie Day meme at the wall, like trying to explain the crisscross.
I am. Deal with it. But or cut it all if you want. But
oh no, it's staying in. The people got to hear this, Andrew.
So the Zords come from that series of the show, but obviously completely redesigned. Like they combine very similarly, but obviously all CG designs, nothing practical here. But like I said, the show would eventually use the suits for a different set of Rangers. The show would introduce a couple of different sets of the Zords because by this point in the shows in Japan, you start to get 2 Megazords per season. They started doing that a lot more, starting with Kaku Ranger moving forward. And you can even see it might even say in the credits that they're using Kaku Ranger concepts. But so they don't change the suits. They keep them the same, but that was a precedent that the show had already kind of set up originally. It made some sense to just do that way. But yeah, we get these brand new Zords. And that combined sequence as a kid, I thought it was awesome how it was showing like random mechanical movements, like the insides of the Zords. everything hooking together. I was like, this is awesome. I was like, this is rad as heck. And I just loved it. I thought it was cool. It was awesome. And that's when like the version of the theme they recorded for the movie is playing. Like, so it starts ramping up and you get that whole combined sequence. It's just really cool.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's definitely hitting all those now nostalgic notes, but then like it's everything you go to a Power Rangers movie to hope you see. Right. I love the sequence where Tommy saves the train from crashing. Like there's this big section missing from the monorail rail, and he flies his Zord down, and it's like the perfect length to connect the tracks, and the monorail just continues going. I thought that was the coolest thing. Like whenever,
even though that's not at all how that works,
not at all. But when I was playing with my McDonald's Happy Meal toy of that Zord, that was
how many monorails did it save?
I thought that was the coolest, the monorail save. Yeah. I really like that. One thing I always forget about is this movie has this entire subplot where the adults get brainwashed to kill themselves. Like,
it's very wild. Yes,
it is so weird, and I always forget about it. But there's this whole like B plot where
it's Ivan Ooze's plot. Basically, he uses this ooze to brainwash the parents into digging up his machines, the machines that he has at the end. Like they did the ectomorphicons, as they're called, and he gets the parents to dig them up, and then once they're done, he's like, "All right." He doesn't say tell them to kill themselves, but he's like, tell them to leap to their doom, and then they all just walk off. Also, in that same note, it's interesting to me
your doom.
That one of the minions of Rita and Zed is created, like Goldar, we all know. Goldar is from the show. Mordant, the other guy, who is never named on screen, I don't think, he is never seen anywhere else. He is created for this movie.
That's so weird, isn't it?
And is never seen again. It's so, I just thought it was so strange. Like, you don't need to have him even. Like, he's such a weird little thing that you really didn't even need to have in the movie. But I don't know why they felt the need to create some new minion that we'd never seen before.
And like, he looks hashtag PP. It looks crappy in the way that the characters in the old show look crappy. Like they're made for a low budget TV show. So it's like they authentically created a new crappy looking character to be in this movie that doesn't even like have any effect on the plot. It is such a weird decision. I agree.
He just has a couple of quips.
That Goldar could have said, you know?
Right. As you know, very, very weird. But well, and then like he's not even in the finale. Like the finale is just Goldar and Ooze. Like it's not even there. So like you really could have just gotten rid of him. But pretty wild.
So speaking of this side plot here with the parents, we should shout out Jamie Croft, who plays Fred. I don't remember them saying his name in the movie. I'm just looking at the cast list here. But he's our clearly like analog for the kids watching the movie. You want to imagine yourself as this kid who is friends with the Power Rangers and gets to be a hero on his own, helping save the parents before it's too late. And kid does a good job. One thing I did note is that he's wearing a Michael Jordan hat, an Air Jordan hat, but it's not even, it doesn't feel like gross, like advertising. It's just, he's a kid in the 90s. Kids in the 90s wore Air Jordan hats. Like, it is, did you watch that documentary, The Last Dance, the Michael Jordan documentary?
Yeah.
It's I almost like you forget just how friggin' big of a star, big of a celebrity Michael Jordan was. He was like bigger than basketball. He was just, it was Jordan, man. And that kid might not even watch basketball, but he'll wear an Air Jordan hat, and that's okay. You know, like it was just that big. So I just got a kick out of that because like if you made a movie today, I mean, whose hat would that be? Without it feeling like obvious product placement, right? That there's no celebrity on that scale, no athlete on that scale today, I think. So
it would like just be a Nike hat. Like it would just be like, it would just be like a brand. Like that's weird to think about, that just the celebrity culture is just kind of vanished in that regard. There's no, like LeBron doesn't have the like identifiable iconography that Jordan did. Like Jordan, everybody, the jumping shot, Air Jordan. Everybody knew it. There was no question. And it's definitely something that I can't even think of today. What you would do as like an analog of that. Also, shout out to Peter Mockery, who plays his father, the other his dad, who ends up being one of the brainwashed parents. That's kind of just the subplot here that they're going through. But yeah, and Bulk and Skull factor into this plot as well. It's a very strange plot.
It is. So here's just a few notes of things that I've just always noticed about this movie. Thoughts I've always had as a kid watching it. One is our Red Ranger and his ape Zord at one point during the fight gets thrown across the city. And as we mentioned, the CG, they're all like real shiny because they're robots. And it hits the ground and goes and screeches across the ground as sparks fly up. And he stands up, and I was always annoyed that he didn't have scratches all down his back. It's just still perfectly shiny. Of course, I know now it's because of limitations of the technology, but I always feel like he should have been scratched up there. And then, Andrew, I could have Googled this at any point in my life, and I haven't, but is skydiving with a snowboard a thing? Is it a thing at all? Do you think anyone's ever actually done it? Think of anyone's like, I've been skydiving 20 times now. I gotta mix it up. I gotta get more extreme. I gotta learn how to do air tricks. I'm gonna strap on a board. Is that a real thing in real life, you think?
I have to assume that it is, but I as a kid I was like, man, that's awesome. That is the coolest thing I've ever seen. I don't even know why. I don't even know why it is, but it certainly is cool. And I just want to talk about this intro scene for a second, because first off, the implication here is that this is like a charity skydiving thing that all 6 of our Power Rangers in their perfectly color coordinated gear are doing alongside Bulk and Skull. But also, like, other people have already skydived, including Fred's dad, who, like, they make fun of for landing in the parking lot. Hey, Fred, why don't you go up in the plane and try to land perfectly? But, like, as the Rangers are landing, they're making this big deal that, like, all 6 of them have to land on the bullseye so that this kind of observatory gets, like, funding or something. Like, it's such a weird setup, because the other like third plot, it's a not even a third plot, but it's mentioned at the beginning and never comes back, is there is a comet that is coming by the Earth that obviously the observatory wants to make a big deal out of. But, like,
well, that does come back, Andrew.
Well, it does. That's what I mean. Like, it's not like a plot, really. It's just mentioned at the beginning and then it comes back at the end. So I wouldn't say it's like the C plot or anything. But yeah, just the notion that, like, these 6 kids are, like, all that's standing between this observatory and, like, financial ruin. Like, what's going on? I don't understand. But they all make the shot.
Billy missed the target. The observatory is closing down. It's being demolished.
There's some penny pincher at City Hall who's, like, analyzing the footage like it's the Zapruder film, looking for the one step outside the line, just thinking like, nope, we don't have to give you money now. These kids let you down. It's like, it's a lot of problems here. But I always but still, I mentioned it to you before we recorded. Anytime I see skydiving now, I just hear Higher Ground by the Red Hot Chili Peppers in my head. And
100%.
Why wouldn't you? And you listen to Free Ride when you rollerblade. There's no other option.
This soundtrack, it's got some bangers.
It goes.
Like, I didn't realize it as a kid, but, like, they were all old songs. Like, even Higher Ground is like 6 or 7 years old by the time this movie comes out. Right. And you got, like, Van Halen in there and Free Ride. Like, to me, this was my introduction to, like, all those songs. I thought they were all, like, new cool songs, but they were not. I don't know if that was to say probably another cost saving measure to use a little bit older hits, but banging soundtrack nonetheless.
I mean, it's got Shampoo, a band that I'm sure existed and is very real. That song for this movie that they recorded for Shampoo reached, like, number 11 in the UK singles charts. Like, songs from this soundtrack were hits. It's weird to think about.
Sounds coming along. Burst our bubble.
But, like, Devo, Van Halen, Dan Hartman, who the Free Ride is originally by the Edgar Winter Group, but but Dan Hartman wrote it and played bass for the Edgar Winter Group. So there's a link there. But They Might Be Giants. I mean, this is just a wild soundtrack. But I remember watching the movie and I was like, man, these songs rule. These songs are awesome. And they still are. And this soundtrack still goes. It goes hard. Way harder than it ever needed to. And then obviously there's a re-recording of the Power Rangers theme song that is recorded by the Power Rangers Orchestra, which I always love when they call a band an orchestra, because you're not technically incorrect, but it still just feels so weird. But
you picture like a big hall with a bunch of string instruments and people in suits.
Yeah. But the Power Rangers Orchestra was Matt Sorum of Guns N' Roses and Velvet Revolver on drums, studio guitarist Tim Pierce, John Pierce of the band Pablo Cruz on bass, singer-pianist Kim Bullard, and then Eric Martin of Mr. Big on vocals. And I still jam this song, man. There's that version of the theme song. It is awesome.
Essential to the workout playlist on your device.
Absolutely.
And it just, things burned in your head. I'm talking about, Free Ride during the roller skating sequence and how they sync up perfectly, them going down the steps with the ba-dam, 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 dam guitar breakdown in the song. Perfect. Think of it all the time.
Every time.
All right, here's the last little observation that has always stuck out to me. That has always stood out to me ever since I was watching this. Speaking of the rollerblading sequence, they're about to get the phone call, get called away to official ranger duty. But right before that, Billy has a line that is clearly, they're rollerblading. It's clearly like 80 yards in. Like they made a choice to put this line in there. And Billy says, "Hey guys, let's get something to eat." And then doot, 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 and we're off to the races with our adventure. And the Power Rangers never eat this entire movie. They're hungry the entire time. And I've always thought, like, God, they must be starving by the end here, because it lasts like a day, 2 days.
Yeah, like there's overnight on the other planet multiple times, like at least twice, I think. But or at least one. This movie is it plays fast and loose with the passage of time, definitely. Like, there's an implication that the parents dug up and built his ectomorphicons in like a day. And I was like, that's not how anything works. That's not how any of that goes together. But
man, the parents of Angel Grove are hardworking people. Also,
it's definitely impressive that Angel Grove suddenly looks like Sydney. In Australia.
Okay, easy.
Versus
also, PP, Andrew.
I did just notice for the first time, like, I've always looked at that Power Rangers poster, the poster for this movie.
Yeah.
I've not noticed for years that Ivan Ooze's eyes are in the background.
I didn't notice it till this week when I was getting ready for this show.
I just saw the Power, obviously the other villains are kind of at the bottom, and then the Power Rangers front and center. I just looked up and was like, oh, those aren't stars, those are his eyes. And I gotta be honest, it's a creepy look. It works.
I am Googling. Okay, here's the reason we don't recognize it. I just Googled the Power Rangers movie VHS cover.
And it's not on it.
He's not back there. He's not back there. No, he's just represented with the egg. But here's what I've noticed about the VHS cover and the promotional and the poster and everything else. All right. Tommy's suit. He's got the gold shoulders and then like a gold neckband, and then down the center of his chest, a gold line goes down to his white tiger emblem. But in all the promotional, there's no emblem, and there's no white. There's no gold stripe going down to it. It's just plain black. They photoshopped out a huge part of his costume, and that has always bugged me looking at the cover of the VHS of the poster.
Yeah, it's a weird one. Oh, I do want to talk about, I mentioned it earlier, but just, there is a sequence, the first fight sequence, which is pretty good. This is where they fight Ivan's goons for the first time. And they're a little bit more durable than they're expecting. They still win. But this is definitely a far more drawn out henchman fight than we ever got in the shows. But every single Ranger, except I think Adam, gets something. Like, Tommy uses Saba. That's the only one we've seen before. Right. But, Kimberly has this pterodactyl thunder whip that we've never heard of before. Aisha eventually has the headlights on the helmet. Rocky gets this weird scanner. I don't remember exactly what they call it. And then Billy's thing, like, I don't even remember what it's called. Like, he calls it like a Dega Stinger or something. I don't even know.
Something Stinger, yeah. But it's like a
this
weird
like grappling hook thing. I guess it is kind of a taser too. Like, I always thought that was weird because, again, those are introduced here. They're never used again anywhere. Never brought up again. And just seems so strange to me that, like, they have guns in a holster on their belt. And we used these, and also weapons that are already commonly associated with every single member of this. And we used none of them. We just brought
it's
in.
It's got to be to sell toys, right? Or it's got to be written in there with the. I don't know if these toys were made, but they have
like
the option
helmet
to make
stuff doesn't even make any sense to me. I'm pretty sure they didn't make like helmets with the scanner thing on them or like the headlamp helmets, but like it's very strange. And then Adam doesn't get anything, so he gets left out of the action once again.
And he's a frog.
Guys, be nicer to Adam. He's a good dude. But yeah, I always thought, even rewatching it now, I was just like, that's wild. They all just randomly have new stuff we've never seen before. And it's interesting, like Kimberly, it's like pterodactyl Thunderwhip, even though like she's still technically, because they're still morphing using the dinosaur names, but their powers are different. They're the thunder powers. But it's always interesting to me. Like for the new special they're doing, the Pink Ranger is going to be Kat, who replaced Kimberly eventually down the line, I think during the third season. And but she's using like the pterodactyl coin. And I saw all these people that were just like, well, why does she have the pterodactyl coin? What, that doesn't make any sense. That didn't happen in the show. I was like, guys.
Enjoy the thing.
Just enjoy the thing. Stop questioning the ironclad continuity of Power Rangers and just enjoy it. I mean, Power Rangers plays fast. Like Tommy, in his last appearance, has what's called a master morpher. So he can morph between all of his different forms. So he starts off as the Dino Thunder Black Ranger, switches to the Red Zeo Ranger, switches to the White Ranger, and then switches to the Green Ranger. Like he gets to cycle through all of them. What's a master morpher? I don't know. I've never seen it before. Who knows where it came from? He's just suddenly got one now. And you're like, okay, cool. Nobody cares. We all just rolled with it because it was cool. That's what this will be.
The new suits look so good. Like those hold up incredibly well. I think they look awesome. And it's real easy, like in your mind, to think of Power Rangers and think of these suits from the movie and forget that like on the TV show, it's like just like a spandex, very plain looking suit with a helmet.
Yeah.
But I love all the suit designs. I love how shiny they are. And everybody gets upgraded. Like Lord Zed has hardly any screen time, but they went all out for that suit. Like his like metal is super chrome, and then like on the TV show he's wearing like a bodysuit, almost like a giant Gonzalez bodysuit with like his muscles printed on. But here the muscles are like defined, and his brain that sticks out the top is like pulsing on close-ups. You can see it like moving. Like they put a lot of effort into, again, this character that they hardly use, but
he's in the movie.
They really yeah, exactly. But you look back on the movie now, look at the CG, it seems low budget, but again, not even just as a kid, just compared to the show at the time, huge upgrade. And man, I don't know. I still love watching this movie.
Yeah, it's a blast.
And we established it pretty well in the beginning of this episode that like Power Rangers is like a nostalgic thing, at least for me. I don't talk for you too much, but like it's rooted in nostalgia, no doubt. If I didn't grow up with Power Rangers, I would not enjoy watching this movie nearly as much as I do, but I did. So I do. And it's a lot of fun.
It is. I think it is a lot of fun. I think at the end of the day, it really is just like a long episode of the show. I mean, you're getting, it's this is a 5-part episode. Episode 1 is Ivan Ooze's appearance and him messing everything up. Episode 2, 3, 4, that's the Rangers getting the power. That's the fight with the Tengus. That's all this. Then episode, the rest of 4 and 5 is the Power Rangers coming back and saving the day. And that's actually what I think is interesting about this. Like Green with Evil, they have a lot of run-ins with the Green Ranger. In this one, they have that interaction with Ivan Ooze, and then they're kept completely apart the rest of the movie. Like Ivan's plot is completely Earth-based, and they're out on the other planet. He sends the Tengus after him, but Ivan stays by himself. He doesn't go after him or anything. And so it's very interesting to kind of separate them. Like I said, there really are just 2 morph sequences in this movie. And again, you think about that as like a budget thing. I'm sure that was part of it. These suits, the Power Rangers, because they're actually the Power Rangers. They've spoken about them before, and they were like absolutely awesome, but apparently like they were not very durable. That was apparently a problem. Like they were literally like taping them back together on set, trying to hold them together. They just weren't very well constructed. And then I think the suits themselves just almost immediately started deteriorating once the movie was over. I don't think any of those suits still exist, just through passage of time. But which is a bummer because they look really cool. It's a separate thing. They didn't have to go that hard. Obviously, the Turbo Power Rangers movie, like looking back on it, is always how I kind of assumed a Power Rangers movie would be. Just genuinely the same stuff in a new, just the same type of production, but longer. With this movie, again, to everybody's credit, they go way harder than they ever needed to. There's like I said, there is not a single ounce of Japanese footage in this movie. They don't use Japanese footage for anything. The Zords is all CG. The suits are, again, they're that mixed group of suits. There's no attempts, and they look completely different, so they couldn't even use it if they wanted to. There's not even, like, archival footage from the show really used. Like, this is all new footage. It's a completely new production. And that's why you get some weird, a few things that are different. Like, we didn't really talk about them, but everybody's voices are pretty much the same. Goldar, Zordon, Zed, Rita, Alpha. Those are all the same actors from the show because they can kind of record those lines anywhere. But all of the actors for those people are different. They're all pretty much local Australian actors, which basically, again, it kind of feeds into that point that our Rangers, Bulk and Skull, and Ivan Ooze, pretty much the only non-Australian actors in the set. Everybody else is new, from Australia, brought in, and never seen again. So this movie is definitely something that was very budget cut. And that's always, it's weird for me to think that it would be cheaper to film a movie in Australia than it would be in the United States. It's weird to think that it's cheaper traveling 2,000 miles across the planet to shoot your movie than it is to shoot it here. But genuinely it is. And obviously you get it now with like state stuff, like states give incentives. So companies will shoot a lot of stuff in Georgia because Georgia gives a lot of tax breaks and things like that. But yeah, this movie is shot in Australia. Don't get me wrong. I made my little quip earlier about Angel Grove looking completely different. It looks great. Like obviously Sydney is a very visually pleasing city with some really cool architecture. I don't think they ever show the Sydney Music Hall or whatever it's called. They might be
a little too on the nose, probably, but I wonder if that's because the fireworks at the end over the water.
They might. I might wonder if it's there. I'd have to look, but
yeah.
But still, very cool. I like a lot of that stuff. It makes the unique locations look really unique. Makes it stand out again because this really is kind of its own thing. And even to this day, it's not really ever something that somebody has revisited. It's kind of really stood as its own thing this whole time.
Andrew, we've referenced this Power Rangers anniversary special that's coming out later this year. I haven't read too much up on it. How is this being released? How do we watch it?
You watch it on Netflix. It will be. Okay, cool. It is called Mighty Morphin Power Rangers Once and Always. It is a standalone special. This is not a team up with a previous or an existing team. Like Power Rangers Dimensions in Danger, the 25th anniversary special was a crossover with the Power Rangers team of that time. This is going to be a separate, completely independent thing featuring just these characters. I'm actually relatively interested in seeing it, just because I know David Yost has really tried to get something like this done for a long time. It is unfortunate that Jason David Frank opted not to be in it. Obviously, the fans, I think, would have really enjoyed that, especially with like David. So yeah, just to outline here, our cast for that will be Steve Cardenas as Rocky, as the Red Ranger. Walter Jones is coming back as Zach the Black Ranger. David Yost as Billy the Blue Ranger. And Catherine Sutherland will be in as the Pink Ranger. Whereas Adam and Aisha will both be featured seemingly as members of Space Patrol Alpha, seemingly a precursor to Space Patrol Delta, which is its own season of Power Rangers. Also, a new character will be introduced that is the daughter of Trini. Obviously, Choi Trang, the Yellow Ranger, passed away in 2001 after a car accident. So this is also going to be doing some work to honor her legacy and her part of the Power Rangers universe by introducing kind of a legacy character attached to her as well. We know there's Green Ranger footage in it. I don't know what they're going to do for it. It might be a flashback. Who knows? But yeah, Netflix. I think it's April 19, 2023 that will hit Netflix. Yeah. I don't know how long it is. I don't know how... I don't think it's multiple episodes. I think it's just a one-off special. I don't know if it's... I hope it's at least like 30 minutes. I hope it's not like a 22-minute thing. They're trying to cram all this in.
Sure,
But yeah, I'm actually pretty excited for it. Just if anything, like I said, to see kind of Zach and Billy get to come back and to have Walter and David kind of reconcile their time on the show and kind of have a little bit of fun with it in the process.
That sounds pretty rad. Look forward to checking that out. But before then, it's time for a question of the week. If you want to ask us a question, you can. Hop into our Discord. There's a link in our show notes. If you're not there already, there's a channel waiting for you called Question of the Week where you can drop your cues like Mike Lynch did here, who asks, which filmmaker, living or dead, would you like to make a superhero movie? Would you rather have them adapt a known franchise or create their own as a commentary on the superhero mythos? Great question, Mike. A bit of a tough. I mean, when any filmmaker, living or dead, like it's as easy to kind of like overthink and get lost in the weeds here. But you know who's coming to mind from me? It's gonna be a man who almost made a superhero movie, but to my knowledge hasn't, depending on how you define the genre. Edgar Wright.
Yep.
I think
that's
his
what
style,
I was also thinking.
His style is just perfect for a superhero movie. It is so distinct, so flashy and fast-paced. He was poised to make Ant-Man, but dropped out of that over creative differences, and hasn't come back around to it. And I mean, I would like to see him work on an established character, somebody we know. I almost don't even care who, because I think he would make it the most obscure character. I think he'd find an interesting take on it. Give him some great visuals, but definitely like give him the reins. I think one problem with Ant-Man might have been, MCU wants things a certain way, and he has such a distinct style that maybe they just couldn't find a middle ground. But don't worry about a middle ground. Just let Edgar Wright do what Edgar Wright does. Let him make a...
Let him do like Thor Ragnarok. Like, you let Taika kind of take the reins on Thor Ragnarok, like you do the same. I'm always been interested in that story because it seems really crazy that you would not want Edgar Wright to make Ant-Man. Like, that would have been one of the first instances of the MCU kind of getting a unique voice, especially at the time. But supposedly what really sent him away was the brain trust that Ike Perlmutter was really a big fan of. And that was his group of comic book people. I think it was Dan Buckley, Joe Quesada, Brian Bendis, and a couple of others. Basically, they would always just offer notes on everything the MCU was doing. And it's kind of ironic in that Kevin Feige apparently did not have a great relationship with him. You would think like it's a no-brainer. Oh, get the comic book guys to offer advice. But apparently the advice was sometimes really nitpicky. And it really is just an example or an illustration to me that just because you're a great comic book writer doesn't inherently mean that translates to film. And it's definitely something that I think about a lot when you hear people say, oh, well, why don't the comic book people write the movies? It's like, well, because writing comics and writing movies are two very different things and could arguably be two different skill sets. Like, storytelling is still its own thing, but pacing something for film versus pacing a comic, that's completely different. And just because you're good at one does not inherently mean that you're good at the other. I mean, I always remember they're like, oh, the writers from this TV show are going to do a comic. And like, nobody ever cares. Like, it's not something where anybody is really like, oh yeah, I wanted the writers from 24 to write a comic book. But it's But Edgar Wright apparently just kind of got fed up with all of it, just took off. And that's a bummer, but he's definitely somebody that I would be interested in seeing what they could do with it. The one people would always kind of spitball it for fun would just be Brad Bird making a Superman movie. Just because he already made one when he made Iron Giant. But I've always been interested in the idea of somebody that just really can nail that kind of idealism. And I think Brad Bird would be a really good pick for that. But Edgar Wright is somebody like if an Edgar Wright Fantastic Four, I think would be just wonderful. Obviously that's not happening. And now I'm sad about it. Right. But I think, like you said, you could put Edgar Wright on almost anything. I would definitely think something a little bit smaller scale for Edgar Wright, like something like an Ant-Man or something with a little bit lower stakes than, say, like an Avengers. But I would be excited to see anything he'd do. And yeah, you could throw out tons of names, but Edgar Wright's where my brain immediately went as well.
Anybody dead? Anybody like what's an Alfred Hitchcock superhero movie look like?
Man, I don't even know. Like you think about something that have like a lot of tension, some revelations, some unknowns, some twists. Man,
like a Batman movie, and it's like only detective Batman. You know?
Yeah, I mean, Batman would if you're gonna do something with Alfred Hitchcock, I feel like Batman is like your easiest analog, like your easiest thing to jump to. Where like Alfred Hitchcock does Batman. Because yeah, like an Alfred Hitchcock Superman doesn't make any sense to me. It's like people will say that, they'll name like a group of creators and it's just like, it's not really in their wheelhouse. Not to say that anything's not to say the directors can't do anything they want. Just Batman just kind of lines up with his sensibilities. Yeah, I thought about Hitchcock too, where I was just kind of like, man, what do you do for like a Hitchcock? But I guess Batman's really the only thing I can think of. Something spy maybe, like a Nick Fury 50s? Or something, but I don't know. Oh yeah, I would think if Hitchcock's making a Batman movie, he's setting it at the time he's making it at least. But trying to think if there's anybody else no longer with us that I think would make a really interesting movie.
Joel Schumacher passed away. He would probably make a pretty cool superhero movie.
Yeah, I think there's definitely something there. Like, yeah, what does a Stanley Kubrick superhero movie look like? Like, a question? I don't know. Like, would he have been a good guy to do Watchmen? I don't know. Like, it's like a Stanley Kubrick Watchmen. It's just, yeah, I mean, I could go forever, but I definitely go to Edgar Wright first as somebody living, and yeah, like Stanley Kubrick.
The Wachowskis for a long time were trying to make Plastic Man, character I personally don't know a lot about, but they seem to have like a very solid idea in mind, and it never came to fruition. But you could argue the Matrix movies are basically superhero movies, but it's not licensed characters. Yeah. But I would like to see their take on an actual existing superhero. Let them make that Plastic Man movie. What are you doing with the Plastic Man IP? Give it to the Wachowskis and see what they do.
Sure. I just don't care about Plastic Man. There was a period of time where they were really trying to make Plastic Man a thing too. Like he was on the Justice League, and like they were building him as like this ultimate solution because he's not technically human anymore because of the fact that his powers essentially make him not a person. Like he's essentially like it's a very weird thing they tried to explain it as, but basically the nature of his powers mean that he's not technically like genetically human anymore. They really were trying to make him up as like this, like, the ultimate fix for problems, where it was like, oh, it's this. Well, Plastic Man's the anomaly. He can do it. It was always weird. I never really bought it. Especially when you have like elongated man who's got the same powers, but has already been in the Justice. But yeah, I mean, that's definitely something I think would be a little bit more analogous, though, as you get those directors that would want to grab something like obscure and really kind of, because there's way less pressure with something that's like obscure, like making it like James Gunn's writing a Superman movie, and I'm like, man, that's got to be a lot of pressure and a lot of notes and a lot of people and a lot of cooks in the kitchen. And like that's arguably why people were like James Gunn did Suicide Squad first, because James Gunn could have gotten DC to give him basically anything, and he chose Suicide Squad because the expectations and the pressure is just so much lower, because you're using essentially a property that you can do whatever you want with, and it's always going to be tougher when you start getting into the big names. But yeah, good question though.
I'm gonna throw one more out there. I think the last one I got. Quentin Tarantino making Jonah Hex in a spaghetti western style.
I mean, I would, what's his face? Sergio Leone. Just go with the straight up the spaghetti western man himself to make a Jonah Hex. I mean, Tarantino would have a lot of dialogue though. I think that'd be interesting. I'm thinking if you're going to go Tarantino, though, you should go with something a little bit more sci-fi. What do you think about a Tarantino Star Trek movie? That's ridiculous, right? No,
it would never work.
It's ridiculous.
He's probably not interested in making a Star Trek movie.
There's no way. There's no way they put together.
There's
no way they put together a whole writer's room for a Tarantino Star Trek. But like a Tarantino, yeah, because you kind of play in the same ground he's doing with like Django Unchained, stuff like that, with the Jonah Hex movie, and that would make some sense. They did do a Django crossover comic with, is it Zorro? Man, maybe there was a crossover comic they did, like Django Unchained crossed over. I gotta look. Sorry. Yeah, it was Django Zorro, and the fact that exists at all, I thought was was it Jake? I guess it was. Yeah, it was like Matt Wagner, did Grendel and a bunch of other stuff, did some great Batman stuff, and Tarantino co-wrote it. And yeah, that was a wild thing. I remember they announced that. I was just like, what? Like Tarantino co-wrote a Zorro Django comic, but that's wild. But yeah, Tarantino with Jonah Hex, I think I'd certainly watch it. No question there.
Well, how about you? Who would you like to see take a shot at a superhero film, alive or dead? It gives you a lot of options out there. And while you're thinking about it, just remember that maybe not every movie is great.
But all movies have greatness.
Thank you to Mark Benavides for singing our theme song. Check him out on Instagram at NotThatMarkAnthony. And thanks to Mitch for the music. You can check him out on Twitter at I'm the Biggie Boy, and check our show notes for the SoundCloud link. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend. That is the only way that we grow. And follow us on social media at BOTRcast. Thank you.
Jesus!